Welcome to the Deconstructed Woman podcast, a podcast about breaking down barriers between women, exploring and sharing perspectives of each individual woman's experience, and discovering what we have in common and what makes us different. Hosted by Elisa Marie and Joji. Welcome back to the Deconstructed Woman podcast. So as Joji and I were looking at topics to talk about, one of the things that came up was the idea of how much social media takes up our time and what that does and how that can influence just our normal day-to-day activities, but also tying that into habit and a lot of things that we've looked at and read over time have indicated that morning routines are really important. But I think for both Joji and I, from what I can take or gather, is that we both, from the get-go, as soon as we get out of bed or even before we get out of bed, we're looking at our email and social media, and that's how we're starting our day. So we wanted to have a conversation, what that looks like, how it has influenced us, and to open up that conversation to you, our listeners, as well as to how that has impacted you. So Joji, I know we have quite a bit we wanted to talk about, but what is it like for you in the morning with social media?
I was usually the type of person who would leave my phone on the first floor when I went to bed. But then I soon became aware of the fact that because I'm responsible for our facility overnight, like if an alarm went off or something, being on the first, I would miss those calls. And so then I brought it to the bedroom. And then I fell into this trap of not being able to fall asleep because I was on social media, or in the morning when I would first get up, then I would have this insatiable need to check my email for work. And then before I knew it, I had wasted 30 minutes in the morning, which I usually reserve to do some kind of yoga or meditation before I go to work. And now I'm rushing around like a crazy person. And so what I then did was to go ahead and put it away from my bed so that I could still hear the phone if it rang in the middle of the night, but that it wasn't immediately close to my nightstand because I would fail going to bed and also getting up out of bed. And so clearly, I had developed some very bad behaviors, and I've had to unlearn that behavior because I can't get over how quickly time goes when I'm holding my phone. I just don't get it.
Yeah, I think that's one of those things that, and that's, hey, I think when we were coming up with names, there was like the time warp, because it really is this period where you start going through, and I think because there's no end to the scroll. So you think about like Facebook or Instagram or anything like that, you can just scroll forever because it doesn't ever have a point where it says, okay, you scrolled enough for today. Sometimes there's some things like my Pandora, for example, when I'm listening to Pandora, at some point it'll say, are you still listening? Which drives me nuts because I listen to it all night or all day at work. I just have it in the background. But it just gives you this little thing. Are you still listening? Are you still there, if you will? But you don't get that on social media. We can just go forever. And so I think that's why it, in some ways, has no limits to it. And so we have to actually create those for it.
Do you remember, and I don't know when this was a thing, but are you old enough to remember when we used to have like time limited, like internet plans or data plans, more likely? And now I don't know anybody who has set minutes on their phone. And so that I think has just accelerated our dependency on phones because now you don't ever run out of data minutes. You can be scrolling and looking things up all day long without any extra cost to it. And I remember when I was younger, that was something that would keep me mindful of, okay, how much data do I have left for the month? Whereas now that would never occur to me because it's not even a thing anymore.
Yeah, I got grandfathered into a program or a plan that had unlimited data. I never had to worry about that, but I definitely think that is something that has changed over the years. And I know that we have talked about, so I had set like my own limit because I have an iPhone. And so I had set the limits to tell me like when I hit 1 hour of social media, that it would say, you've exceeded your time. But I just kept overwriting it because I know the code. And the only way that I could not overwrite it is if I had like my husband put in the code and not tell me what it is. But I have certain times of the day where I need to check out. Like I just need to take a 5 minute to dedicate to those sorts of things. So those, I don't know, I get endorphins from watching other people clean. So again, I think that I'm gravitating towards it because it's giving me that positive kind of feeling amid maybe a hard work day, or maybe like when I'm exhausted at the end of the day, I just want to scroll on my phone when everybody's sleeping. And that's the time where I'm just decompressing. And if I had limits, I wouldn't be able to do that. And that to me seems like it would be a disservice.
So I have a question. Do you find if you were to like track your usage during that time where you want to just do mindless scrolling, do you find that you are finding a relaxation or decompressing, or do you find that you get interested in some topic and then your brain might actually be firing and it may not be relaxing as much as you think?
I think for me specifically, it's pretty relaxing because I don't follow. If there's a particular person that I'm friends with or a particular post that kind of gives me any negative kind of if I have a negative reaction to it, I typically unfollow them. So again, my feed is pretty tailored to what I want. Like right now, it's like all about, again, cleaning, decluttering, and dogs. That's like my whole feed. And it has some of my friends, but I really don't see a lot of like my friends' posts because I'm not following any of them. And so I'm not really seeing kind of their day to day interactions. I know a lot of times people, they're primarily just following friends, and I'm mainly on Facebook. So I'm not really on Instagram all that much. So I do have it. So that's a little bit of a different algorithm. But for the most part, like I don't feel like it stresses me out or creates any distress, because if it was something, I just probably would just not look at it or just unfollow it and move on.
What I find is that I will do like a quick check in on like the day's news. And I like it that way because I can pick the ones I want to look at. And then I quickly just either get out of it if it's going to a place I don't want to hear about. I can just see a lot of different topics at once, which is what I like. But I've also realized that I've got into a pattern at the end of the night of finishing my night up with like animal videos, which is like so odd to me, but at the same time, it makes me smile and it puts me into a better headspace as I'm going to go to bed. That I find that it gives me joy. And then I feel happy. And then I'm ready to close the day out. Do you have any kind of rituals like that with your social media?
Probably similar. I think that I do watch like funny videos. And again, there is a wide range of what I follow or what I like. So I mean anything from funny animal videos to comedians that I like. I definitely try to make sure it's pretty lighthearted and again, keeps me, yeah, as you were saying, I was like, oh, it's pretty much the same for me. It's just like how I end my day is just doing it. It depends on if the kids are around or if they're all in their rooms or where they are. I may put my headphones in or something like that if it's not PG, but for the most part, it's pretty light-hearted and humorous, and I enjoy that because it does end my day. But I know, for example, last night everybody was asleep by 10 o'clock, and it was like, oh, it just feels too early, and it's a Saturday night, so I'm like, I don't have to get up early tomorrow. And so I was watching videos and doing different things for at least an hour, which is an indulgence for me because typically I'm pretty strict about 10:30. I need to go to bed because I have to get up the next morning to start my day. So on the weekends, I'm a little bit more lax, but I think that was probably the first time in a while that I've done it that long. But I did find that once I was like, okay, we've hit like the 11 o'clock limit, it was a little hard to shut my brain off. And I know that a lot of times people talk about like that blue light is not good for you. You should do a more low key activity to allow for yourself to actually go to sleep. So I think that there is something to be said about that. But I think we all have our things that we indulge in and do.
Yeah, I do find that I don't know about the blue light as much as I know that images are a lot more powerful to me than like reading or something. And so sometimes if I see an image on a news show or something that I'm scrolling and it's disturbing, it's really hard for me to get it out of my mind. And then I have a really hard time falling asleep, even if I've tried to unwind right before I go to bed with something a little bit happier. I find myself, my mind always goes back to something that I find disturbing. And I think that's one of the dangers that I see for myself because I've just been doing a lot of reading about sleep and how important it is. And I have found that I have stretched my bedtime. Usually, I like to wrap up TV time by 10 o'clock and then get into my rituals for going to bed. Now I'm doing that till like 10:30. And then I'm realizing I don't end up in bed till 11 o'clock because I got to take the dogs out, take my medication, go upstairs, change, and all that stuff. And so then I realized, okay, so now I've pushed it a whole hour later, even on the weekdays. And so I'm just finding myself getting into more of a like just setting myself up for bad behavior because then if I don't have the discipline in the morning to not ask for my phone or something before I get out of bed, then now I'm in my mind saying, oh, I'm going to delete all the nonsense emails at work so that I'm like clean that up before I get into work. But then inevitably I will end up doing something else. And then so not only did I get a lack of sleep because I didn't go to bed on time, then in the morning, now I've also put myself into a rush state to run through my morning because I got distracted in the morning with social media. And now my whole day is chaotic and stuff like that. And so I don't understand what feeds that, but it's so easy to fall into this pattern. And I know about people talk about the dopamine hits and stuff like that and how much your brain feeds off of it. And I wonder, is this like the newest addiction that like cuts across all socioeconomic and ethnic and all the other categories that we sometimes can associate with one addiction? Is this the newest addiction that has really got us all tied up into knots, do you think?
Yeah, I definitely think that it does cross over a lot of um, different individuals. I think that everybody, can identify that social media. I mean, I was going to pause for a minute because I'm thinking of my husband who doesn't have social media. So there is a sub population who doesn't have it. And I know that for you, you didn't have it for a while. So I think that I would be curious to see like how that, I don't know, we have to look at the research like of those individuals who don't have it. But I think for those of us who do, I do think that it's one of those things where people are looking for an escape from whatever stress things that going on around them. Like we think about the things that we're in control of. And so if we're not in control of things or it feels very chaotic, this I can just escape to. So I think that it has its benefits in a lot of ways, but I do think that it's probably universal that people can get sucked up into it. And we have to figure out like what are those habits. So I know I was talking to you before we jumped on, but like for me, I'm trying to change my morning habit. And I've done the same thing you said, like putting my phone like away from my nightstand so I have to get up and go get it. But I would like to do more, get up a little bit earlier and read or have quiet time in the morning to start my day off on the right foot. But I almost instantaneously grab my phone because that feels natural. And even though I've said this is what I want to do, I immediately go back to my habit. I'm a creature of habit. That's what I want to do. And so I think that a lot of time we know forming new habit takes time, but I think that it's one of those things where if we're not actively consciously aware of it, that it can take over and consume you.
Yeah, I've even tried like trying to practice, and I've never been able to do it successfully, because the impulse to grab your phone is just so natural and so strong and so rewarding that I've even thought, okay, before doing my own self talk, like before you reach for that, think about what you should be doing. You should be, so you have more time in the morning, so you can exercise, so you can do meditation, like all the things that are going to serve you better. But I never get to that point. I never get to the point of what I should be doing. I just think about I should go get that. And so I don't even have the impulse control to think about people tell you to run through what you should do. And I don't even get that far. I just am like, oh, this is, and that's where I think it is like that dopamine hit or something. Because when you're trying to build a new behavior, that satisfaction isn't there yet. You're not patting yourself on the back for doing something that you're trying to create a behavior for. And so it's just so tempting and so easy to go for something you know is going to be so rewarding, even if the price you're going to pay for that is going to be more costly in the long run.
Yeah, and as you were talking, I was thinking in years past, like people for Lent have always said, "Oh, I'm gonna give up. I'm gonna give up social media," and I've always had some excuse as to why I couldn't. Oh, I have my business. I had a side business on social media, so I was like, I can't do it for that. Or I this is how I connect with people. But this is probably the first year that I don't have any of that, and I was thinking as we were talking, I was like, oh. That would be a really good experiment to see if I could go 40 days without social media. We might have to revisit this at the end of this experiment for me. Oh, I could do it, but man, that seems so hard. I'm just thinking about it seems, I don't know. I don't know what I would fill that time with. And like, how would I like get that sense of decompress? Like, I'm assuming people find ways to decompress, but maybe like the things we've talked about, like meditation or listening to a calming app, or maybe listening to a podcast or something else. I'm sure that I could fill that space, but that seems so hard to even think about getting rid of it for a period of time like that.
Well, I have to tell you, when we met in January for the book club meeting, one of our book club members was talking about how in January she stops like shopping and sugar because she's a baker. And so she bakes a lot in December. And then because she bakes, she shops a lot for those supplies. And so like her and her husband have gotten the last couple of years have got into this habit of not shopping and not no sugar. And we were all asking her, like, when you say no shopping, that doesn't include food, right? And she said, no, it does include food because it's the one time a year that we have to eat what we have. And so obviously there are staples like milk or eggs or bread or something that you have to get week to week, but everything else like no meat, no canned foods, no frozen foods, like they go through like cleaning out their freezer and we were all like in awe, huh? So we should do that. Most of us, and she shared that it forces them to use up stuff that they've forgotten about and come up with new recipes or do some planning because that's what they like. And I feel like that about your idea for Lent would be very similar because, and of course, in the spirit of Lent, you're supposed to give up something that is really challenging, right? You're supposed to really know what that's like to do without. And so it would be quite the challenge to give up social media. That's a really good one. I had never thought about something like that. And I don't think that would be a bad exercise for either one of us to do because it would give us time back in our day. And even if it's not something we would continue to practice long term, I think you would have to have a reality check of how much time you got back and were you more productive, whether it was spending quality time with your spouse or your child or exercising or relaxing or fill in the blank. It might really be eye opening. Who knows?
Yeah. Now I'm like, oh yes, we're gonna do this. So if you want to join me, or for any of our listeners want to join us, maybe like after Lent, we'll have another discussion of what this was like because I'm all on board to try it with a slight reservation and just like, oh my gosh, like this is gonna be a shift because I think sometimes even my kids and I will sit and watch funny videos. Like they'll just be like, hey, let's just watch some funny videos. And so we'll just lay in bed or sit on the couch and just watch funny videos on my phone. And again, it's like fun and we're all laughing and talking. And so that's like our time. But what if we were playing a board game? Whoa, watch out, like such rebels over here. So again, I think that it definitely might open some doors. But I think that just the fact that my initial reaction was like, that's so hard goes back to our conversation of how attached or tethered are we to our phones. So I know we talked about kids and phones and things like that in the past and prior discussions, but I think that there is something to be said about social media having such a pull. And what is it about that people want? What is it that they gravitate towards?
Yeah, so I see. I just did some a quick Google search and I found that so Mardi Gras or the beginning of Lent is March 5th, 2025. So we have a month to finalize this, but it would be interesting to do check-ins during the month that those 40 days to see how we're doing and see if anybody can hang with us on that. I think that would be a fun exercise because as women, we always say we have so much to do and not enough time that it would be interesting to see how much time we get back for sure. I think we have to put some parameters around it because I do a lot of during work time, but I think what we're really talking about is probably our free time and what do we do on it. But I did want to talk a little bit about the comment you made about, I think I had brought it up before we got on, about just how surprising it is for me to, as we hire younger people at work, to see that having rules around having their phones out on the desk when patients are around is something that's becoming more and more difficult to enforce. And every time I go into a medical clinic, I ask people about their policies for cell phone use during work, just to do a poll to make sure that we're not trying to do something that's unreasonable. So I'll ask you, Alyssa, what is your cell phone policy if you have one at work for your all the levels of staff? So people that might be receptionists or administrative staff, all the way through people who are in professional roles.
Yeah, we each individually have our own offices. So we have like a hall where we see clients, and then we have our own offices. So our offices are our own space. Um, so we don't have clients back there. So part of that is that our policy is that there's no cell phones in any of the rooms with clients, as well as if we're having seminars or conference calls or whatever, there's no cell phones out. And so we mainly have the policy in place for students because we have a lot of trainees and at a variety of like people doing their internship, postdoctoral, like all the little levels of individuals, but like the rule across the board for all students is no cell phones. But our staff have to model that professionalism. So we also do not bring our cell phones into any of the client space. But I'm thinking about it, I'm like, our secretary, our administrative assistant, they have their cell phones because their desks are right in front. Like that's the first thing somebody sees when they come to our office. And so because of that, their cell phones are out. Sometimes I see them on them, sometimes I don't. Typically, the rule is that they don't have it out when they're talking to somebody who coming up to the window, but I might catch them when they're not talking to a client. Like I might come up and bring a file or something and catch them off guard. But our offices, I always have my cell phone next to me and it's always usually on the charger. I have it charging all day, but I don't typically try to pick it up. That's like a fun game for me is don't check unless I've done something. So I actually have this reward system where I'm like, if I finish like a file or I finished a report or I done something that I need to get done, then you can check your email. Because I have a notorious thing of I want to check my email. Social media, not so much during work, just because I got so much to do. I don't have time for it. But that to me is like clearing out my email. That feels better. See what's going on for the day. If I got emails from my kid's school or an activity, oh, I got to put this on the calendar. Or I have the doctor's appointment. Like that kind of organization happens, but only after I've gotten like the work done. And that kind of goes back to a lot of things of how I process, how I do things. So that's our policy. But I think that I have not ever run into it. I'm trying to think of recently had an instance where I think I was with in a doctor's office and the doctor had to take a call. And I had such a reaction to like him pulling out his cell phone. Like it was like, oh my, I gotta take this. It's another nurse or something calling. And we were wrapping up anyway, so it was fine. But it was like almost felt, oh, such an infringement on like our time, which again was fine. We were almost done. But I think that it did feel very much like this is my time. This is my appointment. And it's not interrupted by other things. That's how I kind of approach like when I make those appointments or when I'm doing that sort of thing. So I think I go into it with the expectation that there's not going to be those interferences or interruptions, but I think that we're all human too and things come up.
Yeah, I definitely have found that in the last 7 years, as I've been hiring staff, that newer staff that we hire have a greater dependency. And even though there is a stated policy or directions about cell phone use in the employee handbook, they all sign it and don't read it. And then they get upset when you bring it up because they might be in violation of it or we explain to them. And so I'm curious, have you run into that with your students or your interns in the last several years as you've been getting postdoc students or students that were younger? Or has it been pretty consistent and it's the way that you convey that to the students? And because they're in a quote unquote internship, that they're better behaved?
I think it's a mixed bag. It depends on the individual because there's been like this is probably like a different conversation too, but I used to think that, oh my gosh, I'm getting older because these younger generations are coming in and they're like they lack professionalism or they lack this etiquette. They don't understand the phone policy. But then there would be like the next year, it would be like very professional students. So I'm like, oh, it's not a generational thing, it's an individual thing. Because then I get like a group of students who are very much understand what I'm saying. They get it. There's no issue. And then there's times where I say it a couple of times and it still doesn't resonate. So I do think it's an individual more than like a generational thing, because I think that there's individuals who are younger generations who understand and do get professionalism. I think that does go back to probably a slew of different things. But I mean, we've had that where I've had to be like, hey, just as a reminder, you can't have that out right now. You need to put it away. And I get a variety of reactions from like total shock, like, what? I can't have this, to, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. And they put it away right away, to, yeah, I'll get back to you as soon as I'm done with whatever I'm doing. Like that, I don't know if that's a full range, but it's been a variety of reactions. And I'm always just taken aback when it's not the immediate, oh, yes, I'll put it away right now. So, wow, this is, again, I think it's a personality more than an age thing. But I do find that we set that boundary very clearly at the start of the year. And we say, this is the expectation. Do not cross over this. And if you do, then there will be the repercussions are they get bad grades. So I think that it does impact them. But I think it's harder at the staff level to address it or enforce it.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I do appreciate your comment about it being an individual thing versus a generational thing, because I do tend to make things generational when they're not. They are specific to an individual. But then if you get like-minded people or you open the door a little bit too wide and then everybody starts to hop on, then you have a group think thing going on, which I think we have. And so it is difficult to extinguish that. And so it's really important to hold that really tight, I think, from the very beginning, like you're doing. The other thing I also think about is role modeling for our kids and how dependent some kids are. When I was talking to Tara on one of the previous conversations, recordings we had, I brought up the fact that I was dumbfounded that one of my colleagues at work, not related to in the medical field, but more property management, was saying that her daughter-in-law works at a psychiatric inpatient unit, and the number of kids that they had before the holidays for their parents taking their cell phone away as punishment, they all became suicidal. And they saw just a huge influx of that inpatient number go up. And I was like, really? That just seems so foreign to me. But at the same time, I can also imagine what it's like, because to teenagers, it must feel like you're asking them to do without air. But it was horrifying at the same time. With young kids your age, what do you think about the fact that we might be in the process of creating that?
Yeah, I think that it's so hard because I think I give an example way back when we have Netflix. And so my kids just grew up with Netflix, and nice thing, it has a timer and all that. So it's great. And then we switched and got Hulu. And at that time, like when we got Hulu, we had commercials. And my kids were devastated that their show were interrupted. They were like, what just happened? What do you mean what just happened? They said, there's like this thing talking and our show is not on anymore. And I go, that's a commercial. Like my kids didn't know what a commercial was. And I was like, oh man, like I created that. Like now they know what commercials are, thank goodness. But it's just like one of those funny things where we set it up thinking that we're doing something good, but not realizing like from their perspective what that looks like. And so I imagine that it's the same thing. Like our kids are growing up. My kids are younger, so they don't know what social media is from the perspective of they don't even know they could have their own profiles. I'm not going to tell them and let them know that information. I think that sometimes we set it up and we don't realize that we're doing that or hindering them in some way because we think, oh, it's fine. It's not a problem. We're just trying to protect them. And we do all of these different things with good intentions that backfire sometimes. And so I imagine that it's just kind of trial and error to try to help them maneuver through this world of, I don't know, I'm in that middle generation that grew up initially without internet and the computers and cell phones. And then as I was getting into high school is when cell phones really took off. And so I feel like I have a foot in both experiences because I wasn't immersed in it initially, but I definitely am now. I wonder what it will look like 20, 30 years from now.
Yeah, I guess one of the things I was thinking about when you were talking is, would it be a good idea to do for Lent, like not that your husband would struggle because he doesn't have social media, for your kids to think about what else can we do instead of being, for them, it might be TV time or it might be, I don't know, tablet time or whatever it is. But I guess because I was thinking about like when I was in college, the hardest thing for me to do was to give up meat for Lent. But now I think about giving up meat and it would be hard, but it wouldn't be as hard as it was when I was doing it back then. And so I wonder if you broach that with your kids now, if it was something that you did every other year or something, then it wouldn't be so foreign to them to actually do without internet or social media or whatever. So it's something to ponder because I do think that it does give a certain amount of opportunity for self-reflection when you're doing without at whatever age you're at. And so it's a curious thought, but one might be worth thinking about. I know this topic will come back up again, but just wondering if you have any final thoughts or should we close it out?
No, I think we're good. I think I'll hand it over to you to close out. But again, I always encourage people to give us their thoughts too on this particular topic and let us know what you think.
Yeah, I do have to say one thing. We probably will have to come up with a way to do this on our Facebook page, ironically enough, because I'm not sure, or we could arrange to put this topic on before Lent starts so we could actually discuss it and have people listen to it before it actually occurs. And just that's a good way to remind everybody that we are really keen on hearing from our listeners. We do want to know what you think about this idea and whether you're willing to do this challenge with us. And definitely could create some opportunities to discuss it more on our Facebook page. But listeners want to reach out to us, you can do that via Facebook. You can do it through the platform where you listen to us. And we would be really interested to hear your feedback about this because we're all in this together. And it's going to make us better and stronger during the process. So thanks for listening. And until next time, this is Alyssa Marie and Joe G signing off. Bye for now. Thank you for listening to our podcast, The Deconstructed Woman. If you like this podcast, please share it with your friends, rate this episode, or subscribe to be notified of all new content. We want to hear from you, our listener. Do you have thoughts on the discussions we're having? Want to share topic suggestions? Or want to join us for a topic that you're passionate about? Contact us at our email address, thedeconstructedwoman@gmail.com.